Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
In most cases, and I think this has probably been true throughout history, monarchies are actually ruled by the court. And the court is a much different creature than a monarch, than a king or a queen, or even a prince or a princess. The court is a shit show. I mean, the court is just a hive of backstabbing and, kind of everything disgusting about the reality TV sort of like, bitch, devious, manipulative, deceitful. It's all of that wrapped into one knot that is strangled around the seat of government. Desperate aristocrats who are sort of collected and go from being like proud lords of a vast landed manor to being like wheedling weirdos begging for the king. It's just debasing and disgusting and dangerous and bad. And it's a form of government all of its own. And it sounds a lot like where we're going right now.
Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast from the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, features editor of the American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books, and I am joined this week by James Poulos, our editor, and Seth Barron, our managing editor. I was trying to think of a funny list of 3 types of person that we're going to be talking about today, like anti-Semites, mentally ill people, and politicos, oh my, or something. But it was all just too tawdry and bleak and grim to really come up with anything funny. So instead, we've decided we're just going to title this episode Yay/Them, because we will be talking about Kanye and Sam Brinton and a number of others as well. This is the this is the bizarre people only episode of the podcast. And when I said this on Slack, it elicited a sort of groan of, you might call it resignation, a certain determinism, because there just seemed to be unavoidably like a lot of crazy spectacle sideshows in politics at the moment. And I thought that it would be worthwhile, if somewhat sordid, to kind of walk through a few of them and try and see if we can draw any sense out of them besides just a general sense of the disgust and discomfort. So maybe it's helpful to say at the outset what I'm not trying to do here. I am not trying to draw any sort of equivalence between hashtag both sides. They both have crazy people on, everybody's, got extremists or whatever. I'm also not trying to trace, a kind of conspiracy web with my felt rope on the dartboard, a la some of those internet memes between all these different people and link them all together with some elaborate network. I am, however, sort of interested to know whether these are genuinely sideshows or whether they have something deeper to say about the derangement of politics going into 2024. So let us, I think, begin with the infamous dinner, the dinner heard around the world. This is a dinner between Nick Fuentes, Kanye West, also known as Ye, and Donald Trump. And just to introduce the various personages here, you probably know who Donald Trump is. You may well know who Nick Fuentes is. I will put my cards on the table with this one off the bat. You get a lot of sort of really poorly articulated and bad faith accusations of anti-Semitism that get lobbed at anybody on the right. A lot of the times, these kind of accusations of quote unquote tropes are sort of hyped up. In Fuentes' case, this is really not. This is not true. This is the real deal, as far as I'm concerned. He's kind of a sniveling weasel, but he does have this big Groyper following, to whom he does such things as advocates the foundation of a white Christian nation and excludes Jews from the West and sort of semi-jokingly argues that I can't remember if there wasn't enough time or there was too much time for the killing of the Jews in the Holocaust or something. But just, the kind of slimiest of slimy anti-Semitic fantasies. That's Fuentes. Then you've got Ye. Everybody, I'm sure, knows who Kanye West is. To catch you up on his latest doings, he sort of had some associations with the Daily Wire for a bit, kind of appeared at a Candace Owens premiere and wore a White Lives Matter shirt. And so it was sort of seeming like, oh, maybe he's becoming a conservative voice, or somebody that conservatives can at least kind of get behind. And then he issued the tweet to end all tweets, which was, it was about going DEFCON 3 on Jewish people, again, indulging in sort of garden variety, like Jews control the world, Jews control everything. And also seemingly, to me at least, looking like he was taking something right out of like the Nation of Islam playbook. Sort of sounded like a Louis Farrakhan kind of thing. Black people are the real Jews and so forth. He's doubled down on this. He continues to kind of spiral into what seems to be at least a partially bipolar or manic depressive, episode, but also, this is going to be part of his campaign for president, which he is announcing. And the last person to bring into this little picture is Milo Yiannopoulos, who, so far as I know, he of erstwhile Breitbart fame, so far as I know, still what they call an ex-gay, meaning that he was very flamboyantly homosexual and then announced that he had seen the light and was going to give up gay sex altogether because he believed it was wrong and disordered. Now, also, he seems to be Ye's campaign manager, so to speak, and there are rumors that he seems to have orchestrated this dinner with Trump. Now, Trump and Trump's spokesman kind of are signaling that Trump had no idea who Fuentes was, that he arranged to have dinner with Ye, and then Fuentes got kind of looped in. This seems plausible to me in the sense that this is something Fuentes does. He kind of relies on people not to quite know exactly who he is, and then shows up and kind of ensnares them by association, or uses that as sort of some sort of statement of commitment to his project or whatever. This is all kind of glommed together into this big stew of scandal. At the very least, I think people are saying, Trump should have people who will tell him and who will vet the people he has dinner with. He got, to me, the most plausible scenario here is he kind of got punked. He should be smarter than that. But the real question I want to raise is not about Trump, but about this whole, universe of, Ye with Fuentes. The last thing I'll mention is that Ye and Fuentes also walked off of Tim Pool's podcast, because he said he was trying to get Pool to say that the people who are unfair to Kanye are the Jews, and Pool was sort of starting to push back on that, and he just walked off. So, I don't know. Are we going to have to deal with this, you guys? Is this just a thing now that sort of these are people, much as we may dislike them, these are people with massive followings who seem to be insinuating themselves into at least some part of American politics. Can we hope that this will go away, or is there some other response that we should be making here?
I mean, I don't see it necessarily going away, but honestly, Tim Pool's having him on was probably, I've seen other people say this, was probably the best thing to happen, because Kanye West is totally incoherent.
Right.
I mean, for some reason, there are people on the right who want to embrace him as I don't know, is he the key to the black vote, or because he's supposedly Christian, whatever. I don't know what it is that they seem fond of him for, but he's a total mess. And as you pointed out, as soon as you question what did he say? Oh, well, Jared Kushner was at this dinner, and so was some other Jewish person, and it's yeah. And then he just can't tolerate. I mean, he's obviously not very he's not really quite as smart as I think he thinks he is, and he's been told he is. I mean, he's been doing this kind of thing for 20 years, as far as I can tell. He likes to he's very Trumpoid in that way, in that he likes notoriety, and he likes to make noise and be in the center of things. The bizarre alliance of Milo and Nick Fuentes and Kanye West, I mean, it's the ultimate clown show. I mean, supposedly Milo Yiannopoulos recently was texting someone about how Kanye West is an idiot, he's a moron, that he's a closeted gay, that he couldn't even keep his beard in control, like all kinds of like crazy things. So, I mean, I guess let it ride. I kind of feel like anyone who wants to throw in with this bunch, is going to be out on a limb. And I mean, definitely. I mean, the fact that Trump's people, look, maybe Trump does have people who are like, no, they can't come in, and then Trump overrode them. Whatever it is, it's like the most insane error in judgment, and it's just, I kind of feel like Trump has a certain self-destructive streak. Like he likes, like even when he said that, like, oh, it would be great if we could have UV light inside our bodies, or like inject, like he knew that everybody knows he wasn't really saying that people should inject bleach. And I feel like he knew it, but he said it anyway. He has a certain perverse streak, let's put it that way. So yeah, this was, I'm kind of in the company of people who feel like this was like a step too far. I don't really feel like defending Trump, bringing these kooks into his home. It's just a step too far for me.
Yeah, former presidents would be presidents. It's probably inevitable in any country, in any period of time in history, that you have to spend at least some of your time personally with freaks and losers. But this whole spectacle and just the jubilation with which anyone who feels like they themselves ought to have more attention is throwing themselves into the discourse around it, usually to make all of the criticisms that it's always so easy to make, that anyone can do them and count on getting more attention. It's just all very exhausting. I mean, these are three figures who are probably all in some combination mentally, sexually, and spiritually unwell. And to think that any or all of them are going to play some kind of constructive or heroic role in the unfolding of this next episode of American politics strikes me as delusional at best. I don't know. This is like if a Martian came down to Earth and you wanted to like convince the Martian that Protestantism was responsible for like all of the ills of the human race, you could probably just like point to these three guys and listen to them sort of go on about Jesus and how great Jesus is, and you will know them by their fruits. And so I find it all to be just very painful and very exhausting, and not at all coincidental. This is a moment at which there's like little fun in conspiracy theories when you have reality, and the reality is that the political scene continues to fracture and fragment, that factionalism seems to have no logical stopping point right now, that you can't like throw a tweet without hitting some kind of psyop or another, whether well-funded and highly intentional all the way to like poorly funded or like revenue negative and unintentional or half conscious. And this is just all of a piece with that environment. It is remarkable, I know, the number of like compellingly adult competent figures on the national scale are like, you can maybe count them on one hand. And it seems that they will, continue to distinguish themselves, but also just continue to be thrown into very sharp relief by the Hieronymus Bosch style mosh pit of sadness that is unfolding around us all.
I don't know. I always thought that guy in Bosch whose like face is kind of on top of his legs, he looked like he was a relatively jovial fellow. No, yeah, I'm. It sounds like we're all sort of on the same page here. I mean, on the subject of factionalism, I do find, and maybe it's naive of me, but like some part of it surely has to do with with putting one's faith in princes, right? Like these are, with the exception of Nick Fuentes, all of these people are people whom I have enjoyed or liked for what they are at some point in their history. I like a lot of Ye's music, but I really liked Jesus is King, especially. I, found Milo a kind of amusing provocateur back in his earlier days, and was disappointed when he had his first, to me, biggest scandal, which was talking about like underage boys. And then, Trump, I thought, was the man for his moment in 2016 to 2020. And like, but look, as Seth says, like there are certain points, you can give your friends a little bit of latitude, but there are points beyond which you do not go. And like all of these guys at this point are just far beyond the pale. This dinner is like sort of beyond the pale. And what I want to know is like, how hard is it to say, like, at a certain juncture, I found it convenient or good that like this person should serve a certain role in public life, and even we might say in God's plan for this like messy, messed up world. And yet now, like, they are sort of spiraling off into broken gibberish. Like that just seems like a really, to me, the most straightforward thing. And yet you see a lot of people who just are really like personally invested in their allegiance to like some particular person. And so of course, like they then split up into these, minute, abstruse factions, because the people that they're following are feuding with one another and are sort of venal and tawdry and dull. And yeah, I just feel like, we could do with a healthy dose of sort of take a breath, step back, like no person, even a person that you may at some point have like enjoyed or supported in some capacity, is like your God with whom you need to be like joined at the hip. Like let us sort of revise and reconsider like whether this is really the road we want to be going down. Because to me, it just seems to be getting, increasingly sort of obscure and, not to say, of course, reprehensible, but also just like, I don't know, lame and unhelpful and unwell, as James indicated.
And worst of all is they're not talking about the things that I consider to matter most right now in American life.
Right.
I mean, just to like heap the insult on the injury, like, come on, this is really just all a massive distraction from the things that I talk about every day. And I think we need to not lose sight of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Trump,
you're not wrong.
Trump is completely, I mean, he doesn't separate himself from the movement. I mean, to him, he really is, there's no Trumpism without Trump, and there's no making America great without Trump. And, I mean, essentially, unless you're willing to litigate the stolen 2020 election, like indefinitely, then I guess you're off the train. I mean, I think you can acknowledge, that they stole it fair and square. And who was to blame? He was the leader of the Republicans. Like okay, they tricked him out of it. It's happened a million times before. It's going to happen a million times again. That's the way, it's a dirty game. So just I've said this before, just going on and on about how the election was stolen. He's turned into, that's Hillary talk. That's loser speak. That's the way losers talk. And he's becoming what he like denounced, which is like a whiny, bitter, sore loser. And that's all it is, just going on about how the election was stolen. It's real dead ender talk. So, that's clearly like his main preoccupation. If he were to like, I mean, I don't know if there's really, any room for him to pivot. I can't really see him doing it. But I think what would have been good 2 years ago would, for him to sort of adopt the happy warrior pose or re-embrace that and just say, onward and upward. But clearly that's not going to happen. And clearly I think he would be willing to play the spoiler. And, another unfortunate thing is now that all of the, Republican leadership and Jewish Republicans are like, yeah, that really wasn't so great. And, we're not really that happy about it. Well, it just is going to, give more ammunition to the people who say, oh, see, the Jews do control everything. Trump wasn't even allowed to talk to Kanye West, and now look what the Jews have done yet again. So, I mean, the thing about anti-Semitism is like it's one of these totalizing narratives, and everything feeds into it. So, you could have like a billionaire guy whose main skill is rapping over other people's music and kind of envisioning like wacky sneaker ideas, claiming that he's been exploited by, Jewish lawyers and agents that presumably he hired. So whatever. I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, in that regard, I have found at least that dealing with anti-Semites is very, very similar to dealing with like systemic racism people, that whatever counterexample you adduce is just sort of more evidence of the theory. So it's like, I have like a Jewish people on my dad's side and, non-Jewish people, Goyim on my mom's side. And I have often found that I'm like Jewish when it's convenient to accuse me of being Jewish, and like not Jewish when it's convenient for me for some reason to be like a non-Jew. And similarly, it's like you could trot out any number of like very powerful and well-heeled non-Jewish people for these people, and it would just be like, well, so those people are controlled by the Jews. So like, yeah, that's a losing game to sort of engage this on a rational level, to argue with it as like, like how much evidence can you produce? Blah, blah, blah. But I do think, yeah, like there is I think, Seth, you're right. The ship that you identify for Trump has long since sailed. And I noticed this also in his like campaign announcement speech, which was that whereas in 2016, you had this actually very sort of blunt and cogent policy proposal in Build the Wall. Like, no, I actually want to build the wall, and it stands in for all of these things like, national security and border sovereignty and so forth. Like, there was kind of not a lot of that in the latest announcement speech. And that, yeah, it does fill me with a certain weariness and ennui, a la what James was sort of jokingly saying. It's like, is this really, are we really going to engage ourselves in these kind of rabbit warrens of, I don't know, loserdom and weirdohood? Anyway, let's turn to a slightly less depressing topic. It's always more depressing to talk about, like, people on quote unquote your side who are total losers, but here's people who are on the other side who are total losers. So at least in that sense, it is hashtag both sides. I'm talking here about Sam Brinton. And you may recall Sam Brinton from his appointment as he's in the nuclear department. He's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Spent Fuel and Waste Disposition in the Office of Nuclear Energy. And he became a kind of meme and a sort of Rorschach test for your political allegiances when he was appointed, because he uses they, them pronouns and is non-binary, often dresses up in kind of ostentatious, bright colored, I don't know, like what looks to me like women's clothing, and also pretty openly engages in what you, I guess, would call like puppy play. Like, he's a furry. I've been scrolling through some of his old social media posts, and they're still up, and they, seem to be kind of unabashed about this. Anyway, photos of this guy were circulating a while back when he was appointed, to the effect of, first Rachel Levine, now this. And this is, for the right, evidence that the Biden administration is sort of devoted to putting the, most sort of extravagant permutations of sexual deviancy in front of your face at all times. And to people on the left is, on the hard social left, is evidence that the Biden administration is committed to diversity and, opening the representation and so on and so forth. Anyway, as Seth, I think, said earlier, either to me or maybe on Twitter, I can't remember. It's all one now. Twitter is just my brain. But Seth said something like, who would have thought that this, non-binary furry player was unhinged in other ways? But of course, it turns out that this is a person with like a lot of other problems. He is now accused, extremely plausibly, so far as I can see, of stealing a woman's suitcase from an airport carousel. This is a felony. I guess it comes with up to 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine potentially. And he was caught on camera doing this, taking the tag off, emptying out. He then seems to have emptied out the clothes and first claimed that he didn't realize it was my clothes in there, but then said, well, maybe I wasn't totally honest. I sort of, emptied it out so that people wouldn't recognize it, and spent like a month with this bag. So what's riveting here is, first of all, the sort of like, I don't know, just the obviousness of it, that this person was sort of clearly unwell in his appointment and now is behaving in ways that are, should at least be a very public liability to the administration of which he is a part. But also the sort of pettiness and needlessness of it. It just seems like something you would do not if you were actually in need of a bag so much as like a kleptomaniac or having some sort of compulsion to perform extravagant and bizarre acts of theft. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Seth, you've been following this perhaps more closely than I have. What's the fascination it holds for you?
Well, I mean, it starts just with the idea that, the idea of stealing someone's bag he didn't check his own bag. So he made a special trip to the luggage carousel, essentially to go shopping, to see what there was that he wanted. Now, he was making $180,000 a year in his position.
Right.
And a Vera Bradley bag, costs a couple $100. I mean, it's been said that it was $2,300, but I think that's including the value of everything in it. That's what it's valued at.
Which he didn't keep. Right?
Which he didn't keep.
Right.
Now, just the idea of doing that, I don't know, to me, it seems like going to someone's house and using their toothbrush to clean the bottom of your shoes. It's like so incredibly inconsiderate and just insanely petty and selfish. Like while someone's traveling. So it just seemed like that just seemed like a crazy thing to do. It's clearly totally sociopathic. But then I started looking into like who the hell is this guy? Because the whole thing, when he was appointed or hired, because it's not a political appointment, he was hired into the senior executive service, which is like the highest rung of the civil service. They made a big thing, like he is not only non-binary, but he's like supremely qualified for this position because he does have a master's degree from MIT in nuclear engineering. Now, I don't know if that and he did work for a company that drills boreholes for nuclear waste, but he didn't work in a technical capacity. He worked as the legislative director. But here's the weird thing. So I was like really digging into this guy, his background. He first came to notice about 10 years ago because he sort of started talking about how he was a victim of conversion therapy in Kansas, where he grew up. Like his parents had sent him supposedly to a therapist who tried to use like aversive, conditioning to get him not to be gay. And then that became a big thing. And he testified at the United Nations about how this is a form of torture. So, and then his main job, I think maybe simultaneous to working at the borehole company, was working for the Trevor Project, which I guess is like an LGBTQ awareness visibility type thing. So he's been kind of like high profile for a while, testifying in favor of anti-conversion laws. In 2018, he walked the red carpet at the Oscars, like he was invited to the Oscars. In 2020, he was with Karen Bass and a bunch of other high-profile people, like LGBTQ for Biden, doing a lot. So he's like clearly, very well connected. And then earlier this year, somebody filed a grievance saying that his hiring was completely, contradictory to established practices in that agency. And if you go to Rad Waste, which is the publication of the nuclear waste disposal industry, you can find some very interesting articles about it. So it's just interesting that somebody in the DNC, Biden administration, gay donor class really was promoting this guy and pushing him. And, I was saying to Spencer before we started, it's like you want to mainstream a certain type of sexual deviance or like this kind of identity, like drag, for instance, with drag queens. This is not only are drag queens and non-binary like S&M practitioners not scary, but they're in fact the most wholesome people of all.
Right. It's actually, virtuous.
Right.
And
but then the problem is, like, when you have it, like, deviance is very tricky, right? Like, it's not like you can package it and be like, see, this deviant is only deviant in this way. It kind of, obviously his deviance spills over as like sin is wont to do, right? You can't contain it. Like one sin leads to all the other sins. So this his deviance obviously. So he also happens to be a kleptomaniac. Oh, gee. I mean, who the hell knows what else he gets up to? Whatever. I'm just fascinated by this. It's so bizarre. And you just got to wonder, like, what is going on inside the Democrat Party where they, like, who is making these decisions? Who tapped him? Who decided this? I don't know. Sorry for going on so long. It's just so bizarre.
Well, I'll try to go on for even longer so that we can balance things out.
Please.
What is going on here is a new regime is being founded. And it is being founded by recourse to a different sort of politics than what is supposed to make America go. And this form of politics is actually not about who gets voted into what office, but who is sort of surfaced up from this kind of, I don't know, let's just say offstage area, and turn into a kind of face of the Borg, installed in some position, one of, at this point, a kind of innumerable set of positions that are beyond the reach of voters. Voters cannot vote someone into these positions. Voters cannot vote people out of these positions. Voters oftentimes do not even know what these positions are, or that they exist, or how they were created, or how they are funded, or really anything about them. They may as well be in a parallel universe, a universe of people to whom the ordinary laws of politics in what once was our form of government just do not apply. And in this funhouse, that is not so fun insofar as you really have to just do and say and think and venerate and anathematize whatever the Borg says you must treat in that way. In this kind of, Disneyland theocracy, it is natural for you to think that you can really do whatever you want if you are one of the elect. Spencer is like, surely he did not need that bag. And, I'm sure the response is, oh, honey, I need that bag, and we are headed into a system of governance, which is based on the idea of like, oh, honey, I need that bag. Like, I will say what I need and what I don't need, and I will take it because I'm in charge. And that is really like the jarring thing about all of this is it is an attitude that has surfaced before. It is an attitude that characterized, the early communists in the Soviet Union of like, well, we're just creating a new government now, and there are new rules, and the rules are we are in charge. And if we see something, we're going to take it. And if we, need to dispose of someone, we're going to dispose of them. And obviously, we're not sort of faced with an elite that's like stealing bags with one hand and like conducting mass executions with the other. But, technology has advanced, and you can now just summarily cancel. You can debank them. You can deplatform them. You can practice lawfare against them. You can harass and hound them out of public life. You can do many things to them, all things which are outside of the ambit of citizen politics, representative government, and all of which leave the targeted person or people with more or less no recourse. They probably don't have enough money to sue. They probably can't cast any vote in their entire lives that will affect the outcome of their situation directly, certainly not within the time frame of the immediate injury. And so, what kind of regime is this anyway? And I think that the more of these kind of, look, let me put it this way. There are some folks out there today who look at this insanity and say, yes, democracy in action. If only we all just went back to the one really good form of government, monarchy. Just go back to monarchy. Everything will be okay eventually. And they present monarchy as free of the sort of sins and dysfunctions of democracy or liberalism or whatever sort of modernism, whatever it's sort of term of abuse you want to hurl at or blame our situation on. And they contrast it to monarchy, and they say, well, monarchy is great because it's the rule of like one man. It's just one guy. Just make sure that guy is the right guy, and then he'll make the decisions. Maybe it's even a woman. Maybe it's a queen. Queen, that's monarchy. Like, why not? But the problem is that that's not really the way that monarchies work. In most cases, and I think this has probably been true throughout history, monarchies are actually ruled by the court. And the court is a much different creature than a monarch, than a king or a queen, or even a prince or a princess. The court is a shit show. I mean, the court is just a hive of backstabbing and, kind of everything disgusting about the reality TV sort of like, bitch, devious, manipulative, deceitful. It's all of that wrapped into one knot that is strangled around the seat of government. Desperate aristocrats who are sort of collected and go from being like proud lords of a vast landed manor to being like wheedling weirdos begging for the king. It's just debasing and disgusting and dangerous and bad. And it's a form of government all of its own. And it sounds a lot like where we're going right now without having much of, look at the chief executive looks pathetic. Trump had a really rough go of it. Biden is barely there. Presidency looks terribly weak. President can't fire his own civil servants in the executive branch. It's very hard to get anything done now. And there are no signs that that's going to change very much. So we have, kind of this pseudo king position that is not very attractive to hold, but the court keeps growing and growing. And the court is taking on a mind of its own, and the courtiers are taking on minds of their own, and it's becoming a magnet as it has throughout, I don't know, this goes back a long way. The Byzantines struggled with this. Lots of people have struggled with it. You can probably take it all the way back to Sumer, back to Egypt. The courtiers get ambitious, they get decadent, they get depraved. They start abusing the system. They start rewarding their friends. They start punishing their enemies. They have extra time on their hands that they devote to increasingly debauched pursuits. Like, we've seen this story before, and I think we're going to see it again.
Yeah, Hobbes was really an optimist, wasn't he? Like, imagining that you could like overcome all of that. I mean, sure, read like Sir Thomas Wyatt or any of the Elizabethans if you want to like get a sense of where the what court politics are like and how nasty and brutal they are. And no, you're totally right. It's like it's a very fond fantasy to think that there's like some a strong man will save us. It's not going to work.
Right. I mean, this is like to be that guy. This is also, of course, in evidence in like, the letters attributed to Plato about the tyrant court of Syracuse. Like you can find it as James alluded to, like you can find it in your Eastern documents. And it seems to be a perennial, and we're certainly like, we haven't escaped those perennials. We've just given them all this new gloss that makes them harder to recognize. I wanted to like raise something also about the whole deviancy of it, because it does seem like that is important. And, you know, you can imagine a version of, I think that what this campaign, this regime masquerades as, is a regime that wants to say, you know, there are some people who are marginal in society. That is, they're not, you know, there's not that many of them, but they're effectively harmless or even like pleasant to be around and contribute to the sort of rich tapestry of our society and our life. Like they're like the Amish, you know, it's like we don't want everybody to be Amish, but we're glad to have some Amish in our country, or the Mormons, you know. And that's sort of, I think, the implicit advertisement that is made for a lot of people, you know, to sell them on this idea. Like representation is good. Like, don't we want the rainbow? You know, taste the whole rainbow. But as Seth kind of alluded to, like there is another kind of like whatever you want to call it, marginality, deviancy, abnormalcy, which is not actually just sort of like you happen to be different from the way most people are in some respect, but like the deviancy, the transgression, the like abnormalcy is the point, or at least part of the thrill. Like that. To me, it's obvious that that's part of like furrydom, right? Which is basically like a simulated bestiality. Like, and you can read people talking about this now. You know, if you read like, I've been watching this show White Lotus, which is about kind of like sexual politics in the woke era. And the creators are like, yeah, you have to like find new modes of transgression because like the old modes are sort of, they're just boring now and they're lame. And like, you know, if that is the thing that you are trying to quote unquote normalize, not just like, oh, don't hate on these people because they happen to be a little bit different, but rather like this thing that is purposefully transgressive and kind of anti-normal is normal now. In fact, it's the reference point of normalcy. It's the touchstone to which we must all refer and against which we must all measure ourselves. Then surely two things are going to happen. Like one, the whatever kind of interest or intrigue there may have been in some of these quote unquote marginal communities is immediately going to drain out. And you see this happening, like every quote unquote community that gets integrated into the Borg becomes like boring and kind of cringe and bland. But also people who want deviancy for deviancy's sake are then going to seek out new forms of deviancy, which are then, you know, as sure as the sun will rise, going to get incorporated again into the regime. And if it's not by design, it all starts to look a whole heck of a lot like it is by design, that under the facade of like, let's be more tolerant, what you actually get is this Ouroboros, this like perpetual recurring system of just like ever more extravagant transgressions. I mean, that seems to be like certainly what we're dealing with here.
Well,
you know, insert Balenciaga commentary here.
I mean, shall we? Like, you're like, okay, so here's right in the time that remains. Like, I did kind of want to pull back the camera and ask, and maybe I do want to get out my dartboard now and like or corkboard and like see what sort of general sweeping statements we can make here, because on the one hand, this all feels very much like a distraction. Like, it does not feel as if ye is like the most pressing concern on our plate at the moment. And wouldn't it be great if we could all set about talking about, you know, the real concerns having to do with like our borders and, you know, China and how to retain our sort of spiritual and humanistic integrity in the onslaught of the digital age. Like, yes, and we do that and we'll continue to do that. On the other hand, the fact that we seem unable to like really face up to what's going on, and the fact that these freak shows of varying flavors and even political stripes keep intervening into our consciousness seems like in itself something to take stock of and be aware of, right? Like, why is it that we are constantly being bombarded with these distractions, which are also just like ever more, I don't know, obscene, I guess is the word for it. And there does seem to be like kind of a narrative about this that is emerging out of this Balenciaga scandal that even if it's not like, in fact, probably is not literally true, or like a lot of the stuff that people are saying about it seems kind of off base to me. Nevertheless, is like, why has this, touched such a nerve? It's because it does hit on something about what's going on, right? Like, to back up here for a second, Balenciaga is a designer label. They have released ads that feature children next to teddy bears in sort of, bondage gear, and just generally kind of sick stuff that with a lot of coded references that people have been kind of digging up about pedophilia and, the as it were, quote unquote, normalization of child abuse. And so this has generated, I think, very rightly, a lot of outrage. At the same time, there have been a lot of people asking, well, isn't this exactly what Balenciaga wanted out of you? Like, didn't they just want you to be so outraged by their transgression that, like, you are talking about Balenciaga all the time? And yet, like, one dimension of it, again, seems to be that if you are, let's say, a fashion designer and your shtick is transgression, is, daring, like, yas, like, let's do something really daring, it'll be so sick, like, then, and you're looking at our current landscape, like, what is there left to be shocked at? And so, perhaps there's not some vast conspiracy at work here so much as like a system of just like endless perversity that does seem to be, converging upon these like taboos that we thought were sort of behind us or out completely beyond the pale. Pedophilia, anti-Semitism. I mean, there is this link between Kanye and the Kardashians and Balenciaga. I mean, Balenciaga dropped Kanye when he tweeted his infamous tweet. Kim Kardashian issued a statement condemning Balenciaga for this campaign. I don't know, like, is it completely insane to start like linking all of these threads together? And if not, what is the way to do so that is neither sort of oblivious and tone deaf nor like completely cuckoo bananas?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Like, okay, people for years now have been saying like, all right, well, what's next? It's going to be the normalization of pedophilia. And people on the left, they're just like, well, that's a really homophobic thing to say because you're implying that trans people, gay people, or trans people that are on the spectrum of like sexual dysfunction that, includes pedophiles. But that's not really what it's saying. What it's saying is that formally, like the calculus of
the rationale
of deviation is that, yes, the culture will need to find new, like if you're going to permit Eros to rule, it will have to find new areas for transgression. And, so it's in that, so in a way, like the idea is that like, no, culture is set up like, historically we've set up rules in order to restrain Eros because like the ancients knew that this is what happens. Like if you let it go, it's just going to keep flooding. So that's why we had restrictions. So once you start removing restrictions, it's not saying that like gay people are pedophiles or even trans people or pedophiles or any of that. It's just saying like this is where it heads. So it's like, the slippery slope argument is always right. How anti-Semitic. Look, I mean, doesn't it just feel like we're entering some kind of like Weimar period, like where high mannerist sort of politics and sexuality kind of go to rot? I don't know. Something like that.
Yeah, there are only so many places that you can end up when you are convinced that that our choices are either like pure reason or pure imagination or like some chaotic combination of the two. We've got tech on one side, and I'm painting with a broad brush, but that's what we do around here. It's technology that will save us. Like human beings, we tried being human, didn't work out very well, keep screwing everything up. Thought that, the democracy or elites or bureaucracy or whatever would save us. And actually those all kind of sucked, and like humans kind of suck, and we can't trust ourselves, and we're kind of gross, and we die sad. So the best thing about us is our consciousness, our pure reason. And so really what we should do is just create a machine that's better than we are and pass off the consciousness and check out. Okay, that's one path. Then you've got sort of the wokies on the other side. No. Technology is great and everything, but only if it's woke. And so actually, in fact, the only way that wokeness will really work is if we have like a woke supercomputer that has the godlike ability to adjudicate every claim of inequity, every claim of, sort of where exactly in the hierarchy of virtue you belong at any given time. That's something that human beings can't do. So really the path of pursuing our biggest and best dreams of trying to create a dream society on Earth requires a kind of super technology, and the path of technology of trying to subject everything to pure reason leads to the realization that actually machines are very boring and dull and inert unless you spray fantasies all over them. And that's kind of like the world that we live in, is one where the armies of reason and the armies of imagination are fighting each other for control over the apparatus. And it's not very surprising that results in a sort of like extremely chaotic and sometimes evil and sometimes stupid and often self-destructive kind of barrage of current things. If we don't like that, it might help to notice that this is a struggle that takes place inside of every human head, like all the time. Like, we have reason, we have imagination, and when we allow these things to sort of become untethered and to sort of just like take control of our senses and our perceptions and our thoughts and our outlook, we experience that kind of insanity and struggle and chaos and, self regard and self undermining and self sabotage in our thoughts and in our feelings and in our ambitions. And this is not sort of me just like riffing. This is, you can take this to a number of different sources. You can take this to the sort of teachings of the ancient church on like prayer and how to clear your mind of the garbage in order to reconnect with God. You can take it to Plato, comparing the city to the person, and understanding how the love of the person and the love of the city are sort of mirrors of each other. This is not breaking news. This is not anything that should surprise us. And although there is a kind of hideous novelty in all of this that we've been discussing, it is ultimately just the latest manifestation of a deep-seated spiritual illness that has bedeviled us since time immemorial. So, as tempting as it is to just think like, well, people should be talking about me instead of these fools. And like, maybe the way I can get them to talk about me is by talking about these fools. Well, maybe, but maybe it'll only just drive us all more crazy unless we find a way to reorient our souls. That would be my recommendation.
Okay, so it was not completely. What was I going to say? It was not completely unhinged of me to hope that there might be something meaningful or worthwhile to say about all of this. I am pondering the fact. I mean, I think, James, you're absolutely right, and Seth too. Like, it's not so much the particular changes that the kind of social left in this country has been making for decades and decades now. Some of which you may favor, some of which you may not, right? I mean, like, you pick your poison. Like, I have female friends who are always like, repeal the 19th, and I don't know. Like, there's all sorts of social changes that you could endorse or not endorse. But if the logic for making those social changes is merely the kind of anti-rule logic, right, simply against order, against rules, then this is the inevitable result. And the slippery slope does win, of course. I'll add one more note, which I think I got from the Red Scare podcast, actually. Like, there are actually some transgressions that would have made Balenciaga beyond the pale, right? There are some certain things that if they were really kind of into, quote unquote, shattering taboos, right, and they just wanted to offend and provoke, they would have used, like, they would have done something racist, right? They would have done one of the things that is actually taboo according to the governing regime, as opposed to one of the things that's taboo according to like the people who are not really in charge, right? Like the people who are going to get up in arms about this Balenciaga ad are not the ones who are setting the actual rules of what can be thought and said. And if you're in the transgression business, then presumably you would be about like seeking the actual taboos that are most heavily enforced. And the fact that they're not, right? The fact that the taboos they want to transgress come from a system of thought and belief that is already very much on the defensive and in flight in America does kind of tell you something. It tells you that the point is to enact transgression rather than actually to like invite the kind of questioning of norms that might refine the way that we do norms at all, right? I mean, the way that this works is they kind of hide the actual taboos by repeatedly insisting upon transgression of things that like are supposed to not be taboo or whatever. Anyway, all of this is to say that, yeah, perhaps the answer here is simply to acknowledge like there are going to be some rules in your society and also in your heart. And perhaps rather than like taking your cues from some sort of obviously unwell cadre of increasingly deranged people, it might be better to refer to the wisdom of the ancients and to the teachings of the church, and right to like do some prayer and some reflection with perhaps some old books at your side. I mean, this is like basic stuff, but also, you know, as James is pointing out, like it is on some level, it's kind of the way of the world for the many-headed beast to just like continue sprouting heads. With that, I think we've talked quite enough about these insane people, and we can pride ourselves in having wrenched a bit of meaning and sanity out of a true clown car. We will put these people aside and return to what we think is perhaps more important next week. For now, however, thank you all for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to learn more about our podcasts and about our publications, you can visit our websites at americanmind.org, claremont.org, clearmontreviewofbooks.com, and our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life, dc.claremont.org. You can donate to support the show at claremont.org/donate. Don't forget to rate, review, share, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you next week.